Hello, my name is Lieutenant Colonel Matt Schardt, and I'm today's host of Thinking Inside the Box, the Gauntlet, the podcast of the Operations Group at the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, as part of NTC's Warrior Chronicles. The Gauntlet contributes to the profession of arms by talking to leaders from our joint force, discussing ground combat, leadership, training, and fighting at the crown jewel of our Army. Today I'm sitting down with Lieutenant Colonel John Dick, Wolfpack 6, commander of the U.S. Marine Corps' 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion within the 1st Marine Division. John and the 3rd LAR just concluded NTC Rotation 26-05, where the 3rd LAR served as the Reconnaissance and Security Battalion for the U.S. Army's 3rd Cavalry Regiment. John, thanks for joining us today. I was wondering if you could start by just introducing yourself personally and professionally. Where are you coming from?
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated. I've never had this opportunity before. I'm coming from 29 Palms, California. My story is a little bit unique. I'm originally from Scotland in the mid-90s. Moved to the best state in the Union, New Jersey. I went to college after high school. At post-Rutgers, I was like, my family served in the British Army, my father, his father, etc. I really wanted to serve, and I wanted America to be my home. So I'm like, I'm going to join. I enlisted in around 2004, 2005 timeframe. And after a couple of years as a young NCO, I had a couple of officers take interest in me, and they helped me get my citizenship. And then they helped me get selected in the enlisted commissioning program, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And then so from officer candidate school to the basic school, I was selected as an infantry officer. And then so the first battalion I went to was 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, the most decorated battalion in the Marine Corps. And I was like, oh, in Camp Pendleton, Southern California, what could get better? And the first big training exercise we did was NTC rotation. Kind of quirky to cut, like full circle 20 years later to come back around. And then I did 2 deployments with them, 2 MUs, Marine Expeditionary Units. I served in Afghanistan with 1st Marine Division. Came back and I was assigned to the School of Infantry West, where I taught NCOs, staff NCOs, kind of the finer tactics and procedures of infantry skill sets. From there, I went to MCCC in Fort Benning and got to serve alongside my Army brothers and sisters. And I asked to go to the MCCC because it was 6 months of just pure infantry. From there, I went to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. I served as a company commander. I served as a company commander in 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. And then I got selected to go to Task Force 515, which is in Bahrain in CENTCOM. And I was an amphibious planner. And then from there, I went to Training Command, is where, again, back to more formal schools planning, but looking at more of a production analyst than actual training anyone. Then I was selected to go to 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines in Hawaii. And I did a tour in the Pentagon and programs and resources. And then I got selected for command. So kind of a once around the world for Lieutenant Colonel Dick. But I've had the opportunity to lead Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. It wasn't on the list of things I thought would happen because I'd never served in it before. But once I got there, there's no other place I'd rather be than in the Wolfpack.
Speaking of the Wolfpack, can you describe 3rd LAR's mission within the Marine Corps and perhaps within the larger joint force? What is 3rd LAR designed to do?
The LAR battalion conducts armored reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, surveillance, security operations in support of maneuver, and offense and defensive actions to shape the battlefield for the supported unit commander, right? So typically, we are highly mobile. We have the firepower, and now that we've divested of tanks, we're like the biggest gun in the Marine Corps, but we are purely there to conduct reconnaissance in support of a commander's intent, and that can be joint. The battalion and the LAR community have been in the Gulf War, in the Iraq War, the Afghan War. We've been in Kosovo. Every conflict, the LAR has been there as a part of the Marine Corps, but also the writ large joint force. But there's a unique aspect of what the purpose is for the future of LAR. Because we're in a period of transition. We're transitioning to what's called the Mobile Reconnaissance Battalion. And that was developed under the modernization effort called Force Design. And so that new mission statement is we will conduct mobile reconnaissance, surveillance, security operations through persistent presence and multi-domain sensing integration. The battalion concurrently fights for information and provides kinetic and non-kinetic fires in order to shape the battlefield and provide decision space for the supported commander. And so with kind of the new things I brought here to NTC, we tried to mimic with the light armored vehicle formation some of the capabilities of what we're trying to get after in the future. Think 2035, 2040. And so I'll talk about it, what we've been plussed up with from the division and really my higher headquarters, 1MEF. So our purpose is really to conduct reconnaissance in the security zone and fight for information.
Cobra was obviously very blessed to get to coach and train alongside you. We'll dive into throughout the conversation. A lot of overlap with what we're seeing in the U.S. Army cavalry squadrons and seeing in our ABCTs, and then also what we're seeing in reconnaissance and security formations across U.S. Army, how the integration of new technologies to do those traditional cav things of inform, fight, and protect. Can you describe sort of your origin story to 2605? Why did the U.S. Marine Corps decide to send you to Fort Irwin to train alongside 3rd CR? And sort of what was your path to 2605?
My foundational requirement, I deploy 2 companies a year to the Unit Deployment Program, UDP, in Okinawa. And we support 3MEF, that's the higher organization in Japan. We support them with 2 reinforced companies. So my foundational thing that I have to do is I have to train a company at a time to deploy every 6 months. In the process, we had done what's called the Integrated Training Exercise, ITX, and that's our form of NTC. We did 2 of those. We did what's called a MAGTF warfighting exercise, MWX, and that's our version of the force-on-force. We did 2 of those. And we participated in Exercise Steel Night, which is a multi-nation joint exercise that the division partakes in. In the process of that, over a year and a half ago, in doing those things, we never got to exercise logistics. We always became not a surrogate for tanks, but basically a maneuver element, not a reconnaissance element. And so the thought process was with the division is, can we conduct a joint exercise with the Army being a reconnaissance troop for a regiment? And so in that process, we were enhanced with a lot of kind of government off-the-shelf capabilities or commercial off-the-shelf capabilities. So I'll just give you a couple of things that we got. I'll talk about more as we go, but from a command and control perspective, we had upper TI, so we had what's called Marine Corps Wideband SATCOM, a small satellite dish that helps us do SATCOM. Satellite Communication Agile Reach Back, the acronym is SCAR, and then multiple Starshield terminals. Those enabled at the company and battalion level to have full kind of SATCOM enabled communication and access to SIPR on the move. We had lower TI, so we had a plethora of radio systems that were amplified with our command and control variant, LAV. We just got the Joint Battle Command Platform, JBC, installed throughout the formation as well. And then we were being fielded with the PRIC 160, high-frequency communication, and kind of a mesh network as well, the 163. So command and control perspective, we were coming to NTC to test it to see if we could broaden command and control in a force-on-force exercise. For intelligence and information fusion, we had Maven at the battalion command posts. We were lucky enough with Northrop Grumman, we got a mobile acquisitions queuing effector, basically a small ground radar system with kind of a super GBOS camera system. They're in Ukraine right now. We got a chance to try and implement that, and then we tried to synchronize that with our Group 1 and 2 small UAS ISR platforms. And then lethality, we came in with attack drones. We recently concluded a partnership with the Defense Innovation Unit, and so we had the latest innovative systems, and some of these could work at night. And so we basically tried to fuse command and control, information collection, and lethality in the battlefield. And then lastly, we had unmanned ground vehicles, and we had tactical resupply UAS. And so we tried to shove all that stuff into a crawl, walk, run, but we got it episodically. And I think you saw that when you were evaluating. Some of the stuff just didn't really nest well together. But we had basically platoons trained as platoons, and then we built on company. We did command post exercises to get to the point where we could join to an Army regiment and fight for information for them. And so it was episodic because we would get these things here and there. We got them as we were coming in. And even in our RSO&I time frame, we got the drones. The Marine Corps wanted us to test if we could be kind of a quarterback for the regimental commander in the security zone, expand that space and use kind of from the overhead collections to what we could bring into the box. Could we do it in a way to enhance the regiment's capabilities?
The Marine Corps and the Department of War's intent was to evaluate and test our joint force, test new warfighting concepts, test new technologies. I think we'll dig into some of those lessons learned here shortly. But what are some things that you did specifically to integrate with 3rd CR prior to the rotation, as we think about future joint training opportunities? What were some of the things that you did 3rd LAR, 3CR did together to ensure that when you started, training and fighting the Black Horse, that you were on the same page?
We identified early on that communication was going to be a challenge, right? Even though we have kind of the similar radios, similar processes and system of systems, we figured out that the Army firewall and the Marine Corps firewall don't talk to each other that well. But we didn't really realize that from October to December, we had 2 communication exercises where we hit HF. We were able to get JBCP back and forth. We're like, oh, this is going to be super easy. The things are kind of functionally working together. But that turned out to be not a false positive, but it meant there was way more work to do. And so we basically had to have the S6s sit down together in the same room and look at our server stacks, look at the way that we're going to communicate, and to see if we could do it. And ultimately, the 2 CPXs conducted like at the beginning of December and the middle of December just wasn't enough. But we did it with 1 radio on either side in Texas and California. And then JBCP, all you had to do is share the names and it would populate. You're like, oh, that's cool. From a communication perspective, it didn't really work. We assumed maintenance as well would be kind of easy to do. But even GCSS Army and GCSS Marine Corps don't talk to each other. And you're like, oh, man, they have the same acronym at the beginning. You think it would work, but it didn't really. We had a lot of assumptions that we knew we were going to have to figure out during RSO&I. And so we got here 3 weeks earlier. 1, to become familiar with the ranges. 2, to kind of finalize some of the things we had to do live fire at NTC, but also just see if we could put it all together to support the regiment.
I've heard you say you in terms of integration, you did LTP with 3rd CR. That's where we first met. You did a couple of CPXs and then arrived a bit early to do some training here at NTC to really get in place. But while those were great events, probably in a future iteration of this, you would want those to be more robust to really exercise, particularly the communication systems.
Correct. If 3rd CR was just getting their pace plan, if I'd had that before, we could have done a lot more, right? And so I think a learned lesson for Marines coming to NTC or to Fort Polk to do some similar training in a joint exercise, we need to know that like as soon as possible, and then we have to start doing as much as we can to lay that flat. My job in reconnaissance is to collect information, not just to hoard it. I have to give it to someone so that it can be fused and help drive operations. And we weren't able to do as much as we could had we figured out the communication, I think, throughout the rotation.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the actual fighting, not just the lead up of it. If you had to describe Rotation 2605 in one word, what would you say and why? Informative.
Everything we thought was kind of flipped upside down, and some of the things that we thought were white were black. My battalion hadn't deployed in 10 years. Our headquarters and services company, the S4, had never been tested to do long-range march. We planned, we did some preparatory training. We'd never had some of the detection systems together. We didn't know if it would nest well. Some of it did, some of it didn't, right? We'd done a lot of training with kind of like, not canned ranges, but they weren't tactical in any sense of the word. It was like, can we synchronize a controller, an antenna with an attack drone? Can we launch it with ammunition? Do it? Yes, we can. We've done over 30 before we came here, but could we do it tactically for a long period of time, and could we control that from a battalion perspective? And we did that in the exercise. So, but yeah, the rotation, could we experiment with new capability but also support the regiment? I think we did, but we had a lot of lessons learned that were good, and we need to improve as well.
Let's pull on those a little bit. I mean, what are some things that surprised you, assumptions that you made that turned out to be false, or some other challenges that 3rd LAR and 3CR and this particular rotation encountered, and things you can take away from those?
In the Marine Corps, I think unlike the Army, we're called a heavy junk unit. There's only a couple of us out there, and most of them are logistics, not like offensive in nature or reconnaissance in nature. And so I was surprised that when we did the road march that we got here in one piece. That's a testament to our maintainers and our users of Marines. Our PMCS was on point, and so we got up here kind of unscathed. The 3-week period, we did over 7,000 miles of collective logistics transportation, whether it was a fuel train or combat logistics trains in support of company operations. And these vehicles are 40, 30 years old. They've been maintained over the years. The longest exercise in a force-on-force that we'd participated in to that point was 5 days. in that 5 days, we don't have to fill up the gas tank, and any vehicle, because it can just last. From a perspective of surprise, our maintenance levels, I think, during the live fire portion increased a little bit, and then we were able to sustain it throughout the exercise.
What do you think? I mean, there was maintenance challenges. That's a common theme, maintenance challenges at any NTC rotation, but Third LAR did quite well, as you alluded to. What do you subscribe some of that success to?
NCO ownership. If they go shoot superior, if they demonstrate, we put their names on the wall, we let them write their names on the vehicles. And so NCOs and staff NCOs owning the process and setting clear expectations of what right looks like. During our periodic inspection process, when we're validating, we'd find Marines that didn't adhere to just simple standards and immediate corrections, right? And so I think from a regimental perspective, that maintenance meetings we attended, that was clear. But I think early on, our commanders were engaged at the platoon level, and they were right there with the Marines doing it side by side from an ownership perspective and from a process perspective. But then there was no daylight between what the expectation was, and the Marines just got it. And so when you give a Marine a mission, and a commander's intent, he'll just run and get after it, and they won't stop until it's done. And we did that, I think, pretty well.
In addition to maintenance, what other successes or perhaps challenges come to mind throughout the rotation?
We had a lot of ammo. During the defense, I think you were getting on me about, our rates of fire were a little bit excessive, but we don't get to shoot a lot. And so when I came up here and I was like, all right, we have a lot of ammo. It's not a spendex, but I'm like, we need to get the sections working together. We need to get the platoons working together. The company commander needs to direct fire. What we started realizing is if we exceed the normal threshold for the bursts of fire, if we don't adhere to the standards, we're going to break some of the older vehicles. And so we learned that right up front, and it took a lot of the transition period between the live fire to the force on force. We were doing so much maintenance, pretty much 24-hour ops to ensure that the turrets would work, because the live fire took a toll on us, and you normally just don't think that. But unfortunately, the vehicles, we learned a lesson that, we probably need to respect the rates of fire that we're given. And then communication. The big surprise there is it worked really well for the battalion. And that gave me an unimaginable, a benefit of knowing where individual vehicles were. And so if we had a higher classification podcast, I could give you more analysis on that. From a perspective of command and control, I knew where my formations were, and I could talk to them with no disruption. So the internal Marine Corps PACE plan was redundant, but also robust. I was maybe not getting the quality of reports I wanted from some of the companies sometimes, but I know I could speak to them at any given point in time.
How about for Third LAR to Third CR? How was the connection and the communications between those echelons?
As alluded to before, not problematic, but we had to problem solve kind of on the daily, right? We identified before we went into the box, the communication really wasn't there. The Army gave us a server stack and kind of a Star Shield terminal to enable us to be able to use one of the P and the regiment's plan. But it was one-on-one, and if that took one in the running lights, we were kind of reduced to kind of JBCP typing communication. So we put together a hand-picked L&O group. Yeah. One of the best lieutenants in the battalion took a Master Gunnery Sergeant, almost 30 years in the Marine Corps, and we said, hey, we need you guys to help us communicate. I need to understand the intent, and I need them to understand what we can do. And from that perspective, I think it worked really well. However, between the squadrons and myself, I didn't really have a good idea of what was going on. And so we were almost exclusively in the security zone and screening for the regiment forward. But I didn't really know if Sabre to my left or Thunder and Tiger to my right, where their limit of advance was sometimes. And so we'd see them coming. Army vehicles look like Army vehicles to Marines. We're like, oh, should we shoot them or should we not? But don't shoot, that's the Army. But that's only because we had JBCP and kind of the command post vehicles, and each company commander had them. So from a communications was difficult. And so I think, and I'll talk about it at the end, but from a joint perspective, we got to figure that out. We were able to hide in plain sight. The enemy, I don't know if they ever saw us or we were able to pick up our signature, but communication was difficult. And then by the end, we were just meeting squadrons. We would go kneecap to kneecap, old school, and just face to face with commanders and opsos and where are you? We need to go there. And we went and got after it.
Yeah, I thought down and in, your communication was great. Up and out, both the regiment as sister squadrons, that was a challenge. But I did think a great TTP was your robust L&O package. And then towards the end, when all these technical systems failed, the face-to-face definitely helped. Sort of as we wrap up, if you were to do this again, the future 3rd LAR commander or another Marine Corps commander coming forward to train at NTC or to fight alongside the U.S. Army, what are some things that you think we as a joint force need to address, sort of your top 2 or 3 that we need to address going forward as you come out of this and reflect on your experience?
So our planning processes work hands down, right? So the Marine Corps planning process and the Army process, they're a little bit different. They're nuanced, but they're the same dialect. I can understand it. When the regimental commander gave me his vision, when he gave me his commander's intent, I had a task and a purpose. I went after it, right? So that joint interoperability is the decisive factor going forward. We just talked about it, but communication has to be the main effort. We have to kind of figure that out. The Marine Corps, when I was in the Pentagon and we would write some strategic documents, our value proposition is like we are the JTAC for the joint force, right? Because we had JTACs in every company. We had pilots in our CPs. We had the ability to do close air support and really integrate any aspect of aircraft into our formation in the security zone. But we couldn't really communicate on the number of different systems from a perspective of we have to get that right. If we transition from sea operations to land operations, and I'm supporting the Joint Force Land Combatant Commander, the Marine Corps needs to be able to speak. In the Marine Corps, we have so many fusion systems now from air to sea, but to come here and not be on the P or the A and really even the C of the regiment's pace plan. And again, I was trying to be the quarterback for the regiment because I had exquisite kind of make sense capabilities, and it was just hard to pass that information. So if another LER or our regiment comes out here to support an exercise, communication has to be hands down the number one thing you have to lay flat, hopefully before you get here. I think from not a trainingism, but like to be successful in the box, you got to figure out the miles gear, right? We got to figure out maintenance. So there's a number of different weird niche things that you have to figure out. I was very concerned that we were going to get in positions and then the miles gear just wasn't going to work, and I think sometimes that did. In 29 Palms, when we do force on force, the miles gear isn't really on vehicles. It's more controllers or the critter teams controlling that process for the Marine Corps. So there's a lot of everyone just rolls their eyes when you see some of the numbers because it's that guy in that Humvee sees that guy and he's you're dead. But in this exercise, it was no, if your miles gear doesn't work, you're not getting the effects. So Marines have to understand it's kind of a different way of doing business, and you have to respect the equipment. What Colonel Chastain told me is I have to bore sight my miles gear twice a day and after every long march. And that is just not normal. So it was kind of a cultural change for the Marines because we do PMCS, daily stop. So we do that, but it was kind of learning that was interesting because it was we had to just explain at the lowest level, you need to do it if you want to have the effects you want in the battlefield. I think secondly, we brought a lot of experimentation and it was messy, but I think it's essential. If we're not pushing the bounds, my idea was as LAR transitions to the Mobile Reconnaissance Battalion, how can I fuse some of these overhead collections assets with things I have on the ground to inform the regiment? And so what we found out was it just took too much time. It was human manpower intensive. And sometimes we were looking in the wrong places, but we were getting the lobs, the cuts, the ellipses, and we're looking at them we got enamored with the system and trying to use it properly, and it kind of slowed down our decision space. And because the LER battalions are getting fused with kind of some of these new technologies, LER has to realize that at some point you just have to say, experimentation, you have to realize that I'm here for one thing and one thing only, it's to meet my regimental commander's intent. I think we experimented with unmanned systems. One worked well, one didn't. So our unmanned ground vehicle, it did the last tactical mile, class 1 resupply. It brought Marines hot chow. Ultimately, it didn't have the impact I thought it would. We had a Group 2 tactical resupply UAS, and that delivered. We had a company in contact. We had scouts in high ground who'd ran out of javelins, and it delivered javelins to them in the fight. And then they got credit for, I think, destroying 2 tanks. That was beautiful, right? And then last, the drones, we were trying to shove a square peg into a round hole a little bit sometimes because we're just we got to get the drones in the fight. But it's did it make sense in this particular area? Could we clear it safely? And then we had one engagement, it was a combined arms maneuver where the drones suppressed and then an LER company attacked, and we had pretty lethal effects. So I think experimentation has to be in the forefront of the LER battalion's minds when they come here. The Army is incredible. They came in and said, What do you have, a radar? Yeah, we'll figure it out. And we're like, oh, that's amazing. And then last, I think, readiness. And I think from a perspective of, we concentrated, we did a maintenance stand down twice before coming here. We put a lot of emphasis on maintenance and readiness and sustaining it over time. I saw my supply marines, my maintainers, they were going back to 29 Palms daily, Camp Pendleton. We were trying to maintain it, but we have to come up with a better solution for that. But foundationally, NTC is a high stress environment. Like sleep deprivation is real. The 10 days, it does feel like combat. You're in it, communicate, experiment, and then have ready vehicles, and you can put that together. You will have an experience that will probably be with you for the rest of your career.
And I think a great place to sort of wrap up, but those are lessons not just for the Joint Force, but I think all forces that come to the National Training Center, whether it's the importance of communication, the importance of maintenance, the importance of experimentation, but not simply experimenting for experimentation's sake, but to drive combined arms maneuver, experimenting and innovating in order to be better at the fundamentals, if you will. So those are great lessons learned, and on behalf of the operations group, we wanted to thank you, Colonel Dick, for your time and exceptional insights. It was our pleasure to train and learn alongside your team during Rotation 2605. I look forward to serving alongside you and Wolfpack in the future. And to our listeners, I invite you to look at our latest products. Thanks for listening to Thinking Inside the Box, the Gauntlet, brought to you by the Warrior Chronicles here at the National Warfighting Training Center. Train the Force. Lead, train, win.